Thank you, Mr. President. If it weren't for a judge's temporary administrative stay, we would still be in the middle of Trump's pointless and illegal shutdown right now. Federal funding for a whole host of things would be frozen, meaning people all over the country who count on the federal government wouldn't get help. And all of us, all 100 of us, got calls from back home saying, what the heck is going on? VA home loans are being shut down. The Medicaid portal is being shut down. The Head Start portal is being shut down. Construction projects are being shut down, all because the Trump administration believes that they don't have to follow the appropriations law. Now, lots of us disagree about the size and the scope of the government. Lots of people vote no on the appropriations law. Fine. But once it's the law, the legislative branch sends it to the President of the United States. The President either signs it or vetoes it. In this case, President Biden signed the appropriations law. There is no provision in the statute, and there is no provision in the Constitution that permits a president to pick and choose the spending that he prefers. That just doesn't exist in the law, and the Article I branch has one most foundational power in terms of the three branches of government being separate and co-equal. Co-equal is kind of a funny way to say it, but it's important to think of these three branches as in constant struggle against each other for power. And our power is the power of the purse. Our power is the power to enact appropriations bills to determine the level of federal spending on various programs. But what the Trump White House did today was announce by fiat, we're not going to fund disaster relief. We're not going to fund public housing. We're not going to fund rural health care or foster care or opioid treatment or highway and rail projects or wildfire containment or cancer research or clean energy initiatives. All of it gone in an instant, and in this case, only for an instant, because Donald Trump woke up yesterday and decided he no longer wanted to fund some of the most basic things that the federal government supports. And again, this really isn't about arguing about the merits of each individual program, although I don't know who's against allowing highway repairs to continue. I don't know who's against allowing Medicaid-funded nursing homes to continue. I don't know who's against allowing someone who's been waiting for their VA home loan to be able to close on that loan. But it's really not about that. It's about a more basic question, which is, are we a nation of laws? Are we going to allow ourselves to turn into a monarchy? And I want to harken back to something I mentioned earlier today. The White House press secretary was asked about a specific program, and she said, well, they should talk to Russell Vought. Russell Vought is the nominee to be the OMB director, the Office of Management and Budget. There's a couple of things wrong with this. First of all, it's not his call whether or not to spend the money. The Congress already decided that. And second of all, even more creepy than that, this guy hasn't been confirmed. He's not a government employee. He's not in charge of anything. And we're supposed to petition this person to beg him to follow the law. And so this is the beginning of a long battle over a couple of most basic questions. First, are we going to allow this administration to just cause pain all across the country? Every state, every county, school lunches, VA loans, construction projects, you name it. Are we going to allow this president to just do this because he feels like it? And the second question is not about the projects themselves or the programs themselves or even the people that they help. It's about who are we as a Congress, and where we swear an oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States. Is that just the thing we do before they give us the pen that says and the pin that says United States Senator? You stand right there, and you swear yourself in, and they give you a little pen, and it says United States Senator. And you look at it and you go, I'm a United States Senator. But the important part wasn't when they gave you your election certificate. It wasn't when they handed you your pen. It wasn't when they give you this pin here that says United States Senate. It's when you swear that oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States of America. And the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America make it very, very clear. We are not a constitutional monarchy. We are a democracy. And what the court did today is important because it stopped a lot of pain all the way across the country. Personal economic pain, family economic pain, macroeconomic pain for shutting down construction projects and business operations and all the rest of it. But it's more foundational than that. We have to establish some boundaries here that go beyond our partisan boundaries. We have to establish that enough is enough, that you might have your view about the size and the scope of the federal government. You might have your view about the previous president or the previous election campaign. But the law is the law here. And we're not going to allow any president, any administration, any time to disobey the law in this flagrant of a fashion. One final thought. There will be a Democratic president at some point. And if this becomes the precedent, I promise you, if you are a United States Senator on the Republican side, you are going to hate this. You're going to hate the idea that a progressive president can reach into the defense budget or the VA budget or the Department of Commerce's budget and just say, you know what, I don't want to fund that. I'm going to plus up this and defund that. That's not the way the federal system is supposed to work. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is my first time with you presiding, so it's good to see you. This power grab, this attempted power grab that took place today in flagrant disregard for our separation of powers, has a home, not in the Constitution, in Project 2025. The American people hate Project 2025, so Donald Trump spent his campaign trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but then he put one of the authors of Project 2025 in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, who is, as we saw in the budget hearing, out one side of his mouth saying, oh, President Trump doesn't have anything to do with 2025. He disavowed it. And as President Trump's appointee to OMB, merrily implementing Project 2025. This is exactly aligned with the Project 2025 playbook that Americans rejected so much that Trump had to lie and pretend he rejected too. In addition to being unconstitutional, that's not just an allegation any longer. A court today here in the District of Columbia found it to be unconstitutional and has ordered a stop to this pause. And that is a relief, because for people in my state, today was a scary day. Medicaid was stopped. The portal to the Medicaid system that the state reaches into, was closed. Medicaid, people say, what is Medicaid? Medicaid is how a great many American seniors pay for their nursing homes. If you're shutting down Medicaid for your jollies, what you're doing is threatening the security of elderly folks living in nursing homes for whom Medicaid pays the bill. We have in Rhode Island and in other states gone through very significant addiction crises. Addiction recovery is very often paid for through Medicaid. So when you shut down Medicaid and close the portal, you are threatening people who are fighting bravely their way through their addiction, trying to get well and better. And suddenly President Trump is cutting the legs out from under them by closing the Medicaid portal and threatening Medicaid. 300,000 Rhode Islanders get supported by the Medicaid system. So this sent a lot of fear through a lot of people. I know there are people in the Trump administration who enjoy that. They get their kicks out of creating fear and having people, cruelty is their pastime. But this is getting a little carried away. Firefighters and police officers. I spoke this morning to the major county sheriff's association, and they immediately raised the concern, what about my HIDA grant? For those of you who've been in law enforcement, you know what a HIDA grant is. For firefighters, it's the AFG grant, the Assistance to Firefighter grants, through which they buy safety equipment, breathing apparatus, new fire engines and vehicles. So all of that, panic stop, because this rash and unconstitutional decision was made. Kids in school often are supported by federal programs. Head Start is a particularly good one. We had a very well-loved mayor of our capital city, Providence, Rhode Island, who started in Head Start and became the mayor of our capital city. Head Start is a wonderful program. Why would you want to threaten all of those children? Sojourner House is a domestic violence support entity and shelter in Rhode Island that supports women when they come out of an abusive relationship and need a place to find immediate safety and try to put their lives together. It is supported by federal grants that President Trump tried to shut down today. It is astonishing. $33 million in small business loans out in Rhode Island with a big question mark by them because of today's bad behavior. So, it's the community health centers. People had doctor's appointments. People were going in for minor procedures and treatments. And suddenly there's a cloud over the ability to fund the community health centers. This is just wild, extreme, dangerous stuff. And I let my lawyer roll for a minute, talk about unconstitutional. The Constitution provides a method for the president to veto legislation he doesn't like. That veto method does not include not being the president, coming in a whole new administration, having missed completely the opportunity to do a proper veto, or for Congress to override, and doing this unilateral thing, which is not only forbidden by the separation of powers in the veto rule, but also by law Congress passed regarding so-called impoundments. So it's flagrantly illegal. And I'll close by saying it's also a threat of corruption. Every time you look at the Trump administration, you got to lift up the hood and look for where the corruption threat is. We're going to see corruption like you've never seen before out of this administration. And the corruption threat here is that you close all these things down, and then you pick the ones you like for the people who are your big donors, for the companies who gave you big bucks, for the special interests who put you in office, for the political allies who serve you, and you let them have their money freed up while everybody else is frozen. Think that's imaginary? It's exactly what the Trump administration did with the tariffs in his last term of office. You could go into a secret little line, and if you knew the right people, you could get a waiver. There is an absolute avenue to corruption in this. Thank God the courts shut it down. This was a bad moment. It is not over. And I hope that my Republican colleagues will rise to the occasion, because this is a basic attack on our Constitution, and it's a basic attack on the legislative branch of government. And with that, I yield the floor.
The Democratic
First,
leader.
I thank my friend from Rhode Island, laser-like focused on corruption, whether it's the Supreme Court, the executive branch, or anywhere else in the government. He's done a great job. So, Mr. President, I just finished doing a little TV taping to the people of New York to tell them how evil, how horrible this plan that Trump has put into effect will be the plan will shut off billions of dollars, maybe trillions of dollars. For what? For things average working families need. They'll be less safe because police will be cut, fire will be cut. Their kids will be less educated because schools will be cut. And in places where there's a school tax, like Long Island and Westchester, it could have your taxes go up. They'll be less safe because food inspectors who keep our food safe could be cut. It will go across the board. Housing will become more expensive. We desperately need housing. Everything. This is going to affect everything. The radius will expand and expand and expand of what Donald Trump can do. And make no mistake about it. Project 2025, which proposed slashing everything, all cut, all to give one thing, tax breaks to the very wealthy people. This is Project 2025 by another name. It's the same stuff. They couldn't call it Project 2025 because when the public found out about that, they were outraged. Well, make no mistake about this, President Trump, when the public finds out about this, they will be outraged. And I got on the TV tonight and asked my constituents, particularly those in Republican House and Senate districts, to call their congressman and senator and tell President Trump to drop this evil plan which will hurt them so badly. The fact that Mr. Vogt will be head of OMB, which is the agency which is in charge of all of this spending, is frightening. It's like putting the fox in the chicken house. And all the chickens, which are the American average taxpayers, are going to be susceptible to the sharp fangs of Mr. Vogt. And by the way, speaking of chickens, here's another little reason. There's so many. Right now, the price of eggs is through the roof. $5, $6 a dozen. It was $2 a year ago. It was $4 in November. Why? Because there's something called bird flu that's killing off millions of chickens. When you have fewer chickens, you have fewer eggs, fewer hens, fewer eggs. And fewer eggs mean prices go up. But there's a program. We actually, when we were still in charge in November, put $300 million into the budget to help our farmers deal with bird flu, with avian flu. It helps them get the PPE they need. It helps them isolate the diseased chickens because you need to build different types of facilities. It helps them learn what to do. That could be cut. That could be cut, and price of eggs will go up to $8 or $10. All of these things have an effect in one way or another on average working people. How about all the hundreds of thousands of workers who have now gotten jobs in clean energy? It's a great thing. For the first time, good paying jobs with a future for so many people could be gone out the window if this plan goes into effect. Now, I know that a court has stayed this till Monday. America, don't be fooled. Trump and his henchmen Vogt will keep at it and keep at it and keep at it till Project 2025 is implemented, even though they don't call it Project 2025. They'll go to a different court, maybe in a very conservative red district. They'll do whatever they can to continue to squeeze the middle class, cut the things that the middle class needs, and then cut the taxes on the wealthiest people in America. Any organization, I've heard hospitals are worried and not providing the care that they need. Head Start is going to close. What do the parents do? People the agencies that deal with mental illness, they depend on government funding. So much is at stake. And in my state, we're getting thousands of calls. How's this going to affect us? And even if the cut hasn't come through yet, people are worried. And they say, we better save money for a rainy day and cut back on this and cut back on that. It's frightened people. Now, maybe that's what Trump likes doing, frightening average middle-class folks. But it's really terrible thing to do. Meals on Wheels, that's a hot meal every day for people who don't have food, they're in danger. Rural hospitals and community health, in danger. New York subway maintenance and mass transit throughout the country, in danger. Money for housing, in danger. Everything, everything. And so, Mr. President, we here, we Senate Democrats are doing all we can to stop this, not just today, not just tomorrow, but in a long-range plan. But we are also urging Americans to call their senators, call their congressmen, particularly Republicans, and get them to tell President Trump to stop it. Cut this out. Cut out these cuts, because you're going to hurt us. The only people who will get hurt by this are average American middle-class families, and that's just about everybody. So I yield the floor and thank my colleague from Illinois for taking up the cudgel here.
I thank my leader from New York, and I'm glad he gave us his little seminar on chickens.
The Democratic whip.
Very well done. And as a Midwesterner, I know a little bit about that, so I respect his observations. Who is Mr. Vaeth? V-A-E-T-H. His title is the acting leader of the Office of Management and Budgeting. And he's the one who sent out a letter or memo that basically called for a temporary pause in government spending. By what authority did he do that? I don't know. I've been in Congress for a few years. I've never quite seen anyone with an acting before their name have this much authority and power, but he had a lot. He has taken to himself the decision-making that has affected families all over the United States, including in my state of Illinois. That little memo that he put out last night is particularly troublesome to me because if you read it, what he's saying is we don't want anybody who receives these federal funds who does not abide by the executive orders of this new president. The executive orders of the new president are 7 or 8 days old, brand new. And I can't tell you whether or not the recipients of federal funds all comply with these executive orders, which have been tumbling out of the White House on such topics as DEI and some of the other favorite political positions of President Trump. But he basically paused federal spending starting last night so that these recipients could answer the basic questions as to whether they're loyal to his point of view. He referred to those who didn't agree with him as Marxists, as in Karl Marx, Marxists. I'm thinking to myself, who is this guy? How does he have this much authority, and how is he able to say things like that that are so blatantly political? Well, the money that was turned off today was felt across America. This poorly conceptualized, poorly communicated policy has created mass confusion in my state and across the nation. And worse yet, it has endangered health, safety, and welfare of Americans across the country. The proposed freeze mandates that the government, quote, temporarily pause, unquote, the disbursement of key funds. Think about that for a minute when I start reading these programs. We're going to temporarily pause reimbursement to local units of government and charities, for example, while we decide whether they are living up to the standards of Donald Trump in terms of his political values. Here are some of the programs that were affected today. Head Start. I think everybody knows what Head Start is. If you've ever been there, it's one of the most enjoyable visits a politician can make. They put you in a room with little kids. I mean little kids, 3, 4, 5 years old. You get to read them books and play with them. I tell you, for a grandfather, it's a joy. It reminds you how much joy you have with your own kids and grandkids. But why are they important? For many families, Head Start is daycare. Head Start is pre-K. Head Start is a chance for kids in tough family circumstances to have a fighting chance. And of course, the Head Start agencies need to get their federal funds to keep the lights on, to feed the kids, to make sure that they can heat the buildings in the winter. And today, Mr. Vaeth, whoever the world he is, has decided that we're not going to give them money, close the portal, close the opportunity for them to receive federal funds. What is he thinking? If these kids can't come to these Head Start facilities, they not only miss the opportunity for education and socialization and a warm place to be, but they're missing an opportunity that makes a difference in their lives. The other one is violence against women. The groups are calling us in Illinois. They call me because the Senate Judiciary Committee, which I serve on, authored this bill years ago. A senator from Delaware at the time, Joe Biden, introduced this legislation. And what it boils down to is if you are a victim of domestic violence, there are grants available to provide safe and secure places for you to stay rather than be put in these horrible, violent situations at home. So what are we going to do with Mr. Vaith's idea to put this on temporary pause? Are we going to have a temporary pause on violence in homes? I wish we could. But to think that he makes that kind of decision is beyond me. Where does he get the authority to do this? And doesn't he have any conscience when it comes to the impact of these decisions? Natural disaster relief speaks for itself. You think of those poor folks in California trying to recover from their own wildfires. You think of the flooding and the hurricanes and all the other events that take place. There are people who need a helping hand. Mr. Vaith decides to put that on temporary pause. Veterans benefits speaks for itself. Men and women who served our country earn these benefits by risking their lives for America. And to put those benefits on temporary pause is a disgrace. Loans to small businesses. So many aspects of business rely on just a helping hand to get started. And if you think that loans to businesses are just for little businesses, keep in mind that in 2009, Elon Musk came to the Obama administration and asked for a loan so that his Tesla car company wouldn't go into bankruptcy. But there are a lot of smaller businesses just as desperate to get a helping hand. In Illinois, the impact of this thoughtless policy is already being felt. Another area that is near and dear to me is medical research. The National Institutes of Health, with an annual budget of around $38 to $40 billion, is the premier medical research agency in the world. In the world. The things that they're working on, new drugs, new surgical techniques, new treatments, will save lives. We know it. It's happened over and over again. So today they get Mr. Vaith's memo about the temporary pause in funding, and they've got to tell their laboratory researchers, doctors and specialists, to stop what they're doing at 5 o'clock today. That was the end of the funding from the federal government. Honest to goodness, Mr. Vaith, what are you thinking? Stopping medical research? You want that on your head, your conscience? Think about what that means. Federally funded research scientists are going to lose funding for this research, and the people of America will pay the price. Families will pay the price. Disability community, the same thing. Ability to access critical services for them and their loved ones. Some of these things are very basic. Paying a personal attendant who will help a disabled person get dressed in the morning so they can spend a productive day at work. If they're not there, the disabled person doesn't have that opportunity. That's a real life issue for a lot of families with disabilities. The Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault in Springfield contacted us today and said because of this announcement from OMB and from the Trump administration, they don't know if they'll be able to help survivors without VOCA funding. These are just a few of the many examples that emerged in the chaos of the past 24 hours. If your goal is to make America great again, why would you start by cutting these basic services for families and deserving people across this country? For goodness sakes, we're better than that. I'm proud of a nation that cares for people who need a helping hand. I'm not ashamed to say that. And some of these people, particularly veterans, earned it over and over again. These are just a few of the people who contacted us. Although the Trump administration has claimed that individuals who receive direct assistance from the government will not be affected, Americans across the country have faced severe service disruptions with Medicaid and Head Start amidst the policy changes that Mr. Vaith, the acting head of the OMB, has imposed. Even the president's own press secretary, just a few minutes ago, was unable to even answer the questions about what was going on with this OMB directive. You know why? Because this move is nothing more than a power grab designed to target the most vulnerable people and disguise it as a way to, quote, analyze government spending. Analyze government spending? Tell that to the family that's waiting desperately for medical research. Tell them that we had to just suspend that for a little while so we could do a little analysis. I want to be clear. The president is blatantly violating the law by holding up these vital funds across America. The federal funds this administration is refusing to distribute have been collected by taxpayers and appropriated by Congress, and the money belongs to the American people. It's the law. Thankfully, a federal judge here in the District of Columbia has decided to temporarily block this freeze, this temporary pause, from going into effect until next Monday, February 3rd. But this measure is only delaying chaos and uncertainty if it's President Trump's determined effort to make sure that this happens. We will not stand idly by while the President plays fast and loose with our nation's laws and the American people's lives and livelihoods. We can have fiscal responsibility. We can have a budget we're proud of. But this kind of action, taken by a fellow last night somewhere in the bowels of a building here in Washington, is hurting people all across America. You can't help American families be great if you don't give them a fighting chance. We've got to stop this and stop it soon. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to join my colleagues here on the floor tonight, but we all wish we weren't here. We should not be here. We're here because the Trump administration last night swept the country into chaos. We're here because it's a break-the-glass moment for our democracy. The unconstitutional and unilateral decision to halt congressionally mandated funding is against the law. It's against the Constitution. It's against the Impoundment Control Act. That's the reason why a judge this afternoon ordered that it be stopped, but only temporarily until February 3rd, and then we are in uncharted waters. This action is totally unprecedented on this scale and scope. Let's call it for what it is. It's theft. President Trump is stealing money from people's pockets and pocketbooks and wallets, threatening their ability to pay rent, heat homes. It is imperiling programs around my state and the country that provide shelter for homeless, suicide prevention for veterans, health care for people who are uninsured. The list is endless. That's not hyperbole. And just in the last 24 hours, since this news broke, Connecticut organizations are already feeling the impact, and they are contacting me, reaching out in fear and worry. I've been fielding concerns from constituents who are already seeing the impact in doctors demoralized and food insecurity workers dispirited. Some community health centers were unable to access federal funding this morning, and many of them are weighing furloughs and cuts to essential services. One nonprofit in Groton, who provides critical mental health services to children, doesn't know if they're going to have the federal funding necessary to pay their staff. Connecticut Head Start will be operating on a deficit as of February 7th if they can't access federal funding, putting the entire program at risk. Amtrak's state of good repair backlog for the Northeast Corridor is tens of billions of dollars alone, estimated $78.7 billion in 2023. This funding is critical for safety concerns, reliability, repairs along the Amtrak rail lines, funding like the Connecticut River Bridge Replacement Project and the Gateway Hudson tunnel replacement project that will ensure passenger rail safety throughout New England. This freeze-on fund threatens all of those projects. It imperils the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail and consolidated rail infrastructure. I know that this kind of blizzard of terms seems abstract and hypothetical to a lot of people, but it's real in contractors who need to meet their payroll and pay for gas for their machines and trucks. This kind of draconian, dictatorial measure imperils 100,000 households in Connecticut that rely on LIHEAP to meet their home energy needs. Uncertainty about federal funding leaves these vulnerable families unsure whether they're going to be able to heat their homes right now in the middle of winter. It has a trickle-down effect on organizations that don't benefit from federal dollars. Just one example, a Connecticut program that provides supplemental energy assistance for households that don't qualify for LIHEAP expressed concerns that they're going to face an unsustainable deluge of demand if federal fund is halted. I was in Connecticut just yesterday, seems like an age ago, announcing a Reconnecting Communities pilot grant program in New Haven. I joined the mayor of New Haven and Representative Rosa DeLauro to announce that New Haven was awarded $2 million to reconnect neighborhoods, an exciting and inspiring project to bring communities together, increase housing, and social and economic opportunities. Now residents of New Haven will be kept in waiting. I was with Connecticut farmers. Just yesterday, we were celebrating millions of dollars in disaster assistance from extreme weather events. Now they may not see it for months, maybe never. That's disasters resulting from flooding and hailstorm. They were counting on this disaster recovery aid. Now they may be deprived of it. Connecticut Food Share, just talked to them today as well. They're anxiously waiting to learn more about the potential impacts to halting food assistance, maybe through SNAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program. They're unsure. The President has failed to clarify whether it will apply to SNAP, but clearly the effect psychologically, creating chaos and confusion, is itself a severe deprivation. Museums, many of whom run successful education programs, critical to our students' success, they're halting services. Even a temporary pause can have a significant impact on education. And for all of these organizations and many others, the effect is not only in dollars and cents, it is in demoralizing. People who are dedicating their lives to public service, they're working in federally supported community health centers, making less money, working longer hours, doing residencies as young doctors. And what's the expression of appreciation? It is telling them we're stopping, we're halting, we're ending the funding. It is profoundly disrespectful to those programs that often operate as a safety net, whether it's for health care or hunger or education. It is profoundly destructive to the fabric of our society in the greatest nation in the history on earth. So it is theft. It's not a victimless crime. It is illegal. It won't be punishable in a court. But my hope is the American public will rise up They need to be the voice of conscience and conviction in this country, and say to my Republican colleagues, this isn't a red or blue issue. This is about people. It is about everyday Americans who will be severely harmed, and their children who will bear, perhaps, unfortunately and tragically, lasting scars emotionally and maybe physically from this destructive impact on their lives. I regret that we're here today. I'm proud to be with my colleagues. I wish we were joined on the other side of the aisle. But I believe that they will hear on the Republican side, despite their silence tonight, voices that are loud and clear to them from the American people that this kind of halt, a dictatorial, illegal stop in federal funding should violate the conscience of our nation. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, our economy, our hospitals, your mother's nursing home, your son's school lunch, your niece's after-school program, our police and fire departments, our newborns, our elders, our veterans. Pretty much everyone in my home state of New Mexico. President Trump threw them all into chaos with an unconstitutional and patently illegal power grab in an overnight maneuver that would make a dictator envious. President Trump unlawfully and unilaterally froze all federal grant funding. He shut down the housing portal that nonprofits and tribes in my home state used to access mortgage financing. He literally shut down the Medicaid reimbursement portals across the country, although after a day of raising hell over it, I think that Medicaid, at least the Medicaid portal in my state, may well be up and running again, at least for now. And for context, almost a quarter of my state's budget actually moves through that portal. About $8 billion in Medicaid funding every single year in one small state alone. He threw every town and county, tribe and nonprofit, healthcare provider, school and preschool into total disarray. And from our state's roundhouse to the classroom to the emergency room, today was chaos. People want answers. My phone has literally been ringing off the hook from people around the state who want answers, who want certainty. Did Donald Trump just cut off funding for 7 out of 10 nursing home residents, for 55% of newborn births in New Mexico's doctors, New Mexico's hospitals? Did Donald Trump just deprive 7 out of 10 New Mexican children their daily lunch? Did Donald Trump just effectively close my child's preschool program? The reality is that most of President Trump's own staff don't know or won't answer those questions just yet. And my Republican colleagues sure aren't jumping in to figure it out either. One thing that is clear to me is the law. The president cannot override, delay, rescind Congress's appropriations laws once they are signed into law, full stop. This has been upheld time and again by the Supreme Court, by the Department of Justice, the Government Accountability Office, and by the law, specifically the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Congress had to write and pass this law after President Nixon tried to withhold congressionally appropriated funds. And Nixon was wrong, just like President Trump is wrong now. We should all remember, especially my Republican colleagues who aren't here tonight, but really all of us, that elections swing both ways. We've seen the back and forth for the last few election cycles. Sometimes Your party's in charge of the White House. Sometimes it's not. But think for a moment about what it would mean if the president, any president, could unilaterally cut off federal funds that he or she didn't like. Sure, a conservative president could decide to cripple the Head Start programs in blue states, but it's every bit as true that a progressive president could decide to cripple the defense contracts or the military bases in red states. That is not democracy. That's chaos. And today was just a small taste of that. As a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I know how much work goes into writing and passing our bipartisan funding laws. There have been times when I've been able to work with my Republican colleagues to pass appropriations bills out of committee unanimously. And I know that, and I am not going to cede that to any administration to be abused. Here's where I need help from my own constituents, help from New Mexicans. I want to hear from you about Donald Trump's blockade and how it is affecting you and your family. If your town's COPS grants get frozen, I need to know. If your VA mortgage gets held up, I need to know. If you're a nonprofit that is giving services in the area of violence against women, of refuges for people who are battered, and your funding gets held up, these are the stories that I think need to be held up to understand just what is happening in our country right now. And I hope that all of us, not just Democrats, but Republicans as well, who have a vested interest in being able to create certainty in our own states, certainty for the economy, certainty for the small business community, can come together and say that this is not what democracy looks like. Let's create that certainty. Let's follow the law. Let's make sure that whatever we agree to here in this amazing Capitol, that not only passes both chambers, but gets signed into law by the President of the United States, that we abide by that. Because only if we all agree to color inside the lines and to act like this a democracy will this remain a democracy. And I just want to say to my own constituents how sorry I am that they're going through this right now, because the amount of anguish and uncertainty and, I had heard from a tribal housing program today that said, we won't be able to make payroll in a few days if this is how this is going to be. And you can tell story after story like that of just huge clouds hanging over people who are just trying to do a good job for their communities and provide services and do their jobs. That is not how you grow the economy. So I want to thank all of my colleagues who have come to the floor to talk about this. We're all getting story after story from our states. We need to lift those up, and we need to say that we need to put this chapter behind us for the benefit of the American people.
The senator from Wisconsin.
Mr. President, I rise today because the people of my state are in pain. They're confused and they are scared. This is all because of a blatantly unconstitutional power grab from the President of the United States. While we have rightly seen this power grab blocked by the courts, it is only temporary, and the larger issue remains. Our Constitution is extremely clear. Congress, composed of people elected by the citizens of each of our states or districts, it's Congress that makes the law. In the Senate, those laws are almost always passed on a bipartisan basis. And after we work out our differences and pass a law, the President then implements the law. That's it. The Constitution does not say the President can implement just the laws he likes. The Constitution does not say the president can implement the laws just when he likes. The Constitution is crystal clear on this. But the Trump administration is ignoring the Constitution and refusing to implement the laws that Democrats and Republicans passed together. And it's trying to cut funding for absolutely critical programs. Every senator and member of the House of Representatives should be deeply concerned by that. I doubt my Republican colleagues would want a future Democratic administration to ignore annual appropriation laws. So a judge's 11th hour decision to temporarily block this power grab may have postponed the pain. But that's all it did, by a week. The pain I'm worried about will be the impact that people in every part of my state experience. Will community health centers be able to access funding to continue to provide health care for the 30 million Americans that they serve annually? Will Title X be available to continue providing cancer screenings, access to contraception, and other preventative care for women and families? Will individuals with opioid abuse disorders be able to access medication-assisted treatment? Will homeless youth be able to access emergency shelter and transitional housing assistance? Will research into life-saving cures for deadly diseases, including cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's, be paused? Will patients be able to continue receiving potentially life-saving treatments as part of critical clinical trials? The programs our veterans rely on could be cut. Programs children and families rely on could be cut. Support for our farmers could be cut. The list goes on and on. But my office saw and heard the people behind this list. Like the deputy fire chief who called today wondering if he was going to have to lay off some of his firefighters. Or the mothers and local school district staff that we heard from who called worried that their kids would not be able to get a hot school lunch tomorrow. We heard from a child care facility in western Wisconsin that would be forced to lay off people by Thursday if these cuts went into effect. My office heard from a mother whose son is disabled, and she didn't know if his Medicaid was going to be cut or not. I heard from a substance use treatment provider and a domestic abuse shelter administrator who didn't know if they could help those fighting addiction or escaping unsafe situations. These people are real. These are very real consequences if the president gets away with this unconstitutional power grab and cuts programs that Americans rely on. I am calling on my Democratic and Republican colleagues to speak out against this overreach. Stand up for your constituents, and for that matter, stand up for the Constitution.
Mr. President.
Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I'm honored to be with my colleagues on the floor to talk about the actions that have become very manifest in Virginia today because of the president's executive orders, particularly the recent order pausing federal funding, grant funding, program funding. And I want to thank my colleagues for being here on the floor to talk about this and share just in the last 24 hours what Virginians are saying and what Virginians are asking and what Virginians are worried about. And then I want to make one point about my federal workforce and an offer that the president made to them at the end of the day. And then finally raise a question of what President Trump is afraid of. President Trump has 2 Republican houses. If he wants to do something to shrink the size of government, if he wants to do something to reduce spending here or there, we've got a March 14 budget deadline, and he's got 2 Republican houses, and there's a way to do this unless you are afraid that your Republican majorities don't want to go as far as you do in cutting Medicaid and cutting Medicare and endangering Social Security and hurting kids and hurting veterans and hurting families. So let me talk about the orders of the day and then the federal workforce and finish with this question: what is President Trump afraid of? I started to hear from Virginians about this federal funding pause yesterday. I was at an event in Fredericksburg to kick off tax season, and the local United Way and Chamber of Commerce were initiating something they've done for 21 years in a row: volunteer tax assistance for low and middle income folks. Classic community program. A lot of volunteers help everyday folks figure out how to file their taxes and make sure that they can get benefits that they are entitled to. As I was at this kickoff, people came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm a veteran. I'm trying to get an appointment at a VA hospital or clinic, but the VA portal is closed to me. What's going on?" What's going on? This was the leading edge of this chaos. Someone else came to me at this session, this kind of good news event about volunteer tax assistance, and said, the federal government is paid to build a VA clinic in Fredericksburg, state of the art, right on Interstate 95, visible to all, scheduled to open in February. We are still being told that the grand opening is going to happen, but now those working there are saying they're under a hiring freeze. We've spent tens of millions of dollars to build this facility that looks great, but we're under a hiring freeze. Can we even hire people to serve the veterans in this region? This was how it started. From then to today, let me tell you other calls of anguish we've received in our office. 2 child care centers, one in the Williamsburg area, one in Appalachia, far, far away in Southwest Virginia. We think our funding is being cut off. We think we may not have enough to pay staff. And we also think parents who are receiving some child care funding, that may get cut off. And so neither they can afford child care nor we can afford to maintain the employment of these hardworking child care workers. To child care centers. Universities reached out to me today. We're doing cutting-edge medical research. We have contracts that are ongoing right now, and we're about to send a bill to the federal government because we do the work and then we submit bills. We're not sure it's going to be paid. What do we do? Lay off the researchers and not get the research done? What should we do, Senator? There's an organization in Virginia called the Virginia Healthcare Foundation. What they do is they help low-income people and seniors apply for Medicaid, apply for Affordable Care Act subsidies. They have a contract with CMS to help them hire 8 staffers, they call them navigators, who work around the state helping low-income people access programs to which they are entitled, for which they have paid taxes. They received the note suggesting that that grant to hire these navigators to help everyday people was going to expire, and they couldn't get any federal funding after 5 o'clock today. They heard this late yesterday, so they did what any good organization would do. They reached out this morning to the CMS to say, please give us the payment right now before 5 o'clock today. And what they got back from CMS was, sorry, our website is down. We've just decided that today will be the day that we'll just spend time repairing our website, and it will be open again soon. Open again soon, but after the 5 o'clock deadline. You don't have to be a genius to figure this out. Hurting people getting health insurance, hurting people trying to get Medicaid benefits, hurting child care centers, hurting veterans trying to get appointments, hurting a VA clinic we've spent tens of millions of dollars to build by threatening, through a hiring freeze, the ability of this place to open. And that's just a little snapshot. There was an earlier order freezing foreign assistance funding, a whole lot of nonprofits, church-based nonprofits like World Vision and other organizations that do foreign assistance work around the world, humanitarian aid in Ukraine, for example. They were told they don't get funding anymore. The only foreign assistance we will give, according to the Trump executive order, is military armaments transfers to 2 countries in the world, Egypt and Israel. No humanitarian aid, no transfer of military assistance to other nations. And this is all on the say-so of a president trying to overturn existing appropriations bills that have been passed by a bipartisan Congress. If I've heard these stories in one day, and my colleagues have heard these stories in one day, I know what I'm going to hear tomorrow. I'm going to hear through the weekend. This is going to build like an avalanche, and it's not just Democratic senators who are hearing these stories. We have to respect the law and congressional appropriations. And I ask anyone hearing who's concerned about this, if you're in Virginia, call my office. If you're not in Virginia, call your congressman or woman, call your senator, and tell them the president is not above the law. The president must follow the law, and it's Congress, Democrats and Republicans, who have to ensure that the president follows the law. Second, Mr. President, I want to talk about federal employees. The federal employees received an interesting email at the end of the day today. I happen to have some fellows assigned to me who are not Senate employees, but they are executive branch employees, as most of us have, working in my office. And they received an email that said, from the administration, if you tender your resignation by next Friday, we will guarantee you payment through the end of September, whether or not you show up for work. So tender your resignation, and then, boy, it's just going to be a gravy train. You're just going to get paid for 7 months without working. The president has no authority to make that offer. There's no budget line item to pay people who are not showing up for work. This is a guy who made this promise to contractors again and again and again when he was a private business guy. Oh, come work for me on my casino. Come work for me in a hotel. We're going to do a handshake. We're going to do a contract. The contractor does the work and then finds out they get stiffed. So my message to federal employees who receive this is, yeah, the president has tried to terrorize you for about a week and then gives you a little sweetheart offer. If you resign in the next week, we're just going to pay you for doing nothing for the next 7 months. Don't be fooled. He's tricked hundreds of people with that offer. If you accept that offer and resign, he'll stiff you just like he stiffed the contractors. He doesn't have any authority to do this. Do not be fooled by this guy. You were here before he was here, and you'll be here after he was here. Show up for work, be diligent, serve Americans every day, make their life better, answer their phone call, give them an answer, track down their constituent call. Don't be fooled by a fake offer that because he's terrorized you in the last week, it would be easy to just resign now and get a check for 7 months, because I can tell you that promise is worth nothing. And you will regret it just like these contractors regretted it who did work for this guy when he was a businessman. Finally, Mr. President, last thing I'll say is this. What is this move by the president to try to shrink the federal workforce? Because we all know this. If he can persuade a bunch of people to resign, he'll stiff them, and then he won't fill the position. So, okay, that's one way to shrink the federal workforce. If I can get away with not distributing money that pursuant to a congressional appropriation, okay, that'll shrink the federal budget. But wait a minute. The president has 2 Republican houses. We are supposed to come up with a budget deal by March 14. What's today? Is it like the 25th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 28th? Is today the January 28th? Think I'm right? March 14 isn't very far away. We are supposed to come up with a budget deal by March 14th. And the president is like sitting in the catbird seat. He's got 2 Republican houses. So if he wants to slash federal spending, if he wants to reduce the federal workforce, if he wants to gut Medicaid, gut Medicare, gut Social Security, gut the SNAP program, gut low-income heating assistance, gut rental assistance, gut Title I funding to our public schools, guess what? He's got 2 Republican houses that he can persuade to do his bidding. He's been pretty good so far at persuading these 2 houses to do his bidding. So why didn't he do that? That would be the lawful way to accomplish that. If President Trump could convince the 2 houses to slash all these programs in a budget, that would be lawful. Get an appropriations deal that cuts all these programs the way he and Russell Vought and Project 2025 want to do it. But that's not what he's doing. He's doing it, trying to do it on his own. Why? Why would President Trump, who has a clearly legal path ahead of him that he can exercise over the course of the next 6 weeks, it's not very long, to get a budget deal with 2 Republican houses, why would a President Trump with 2 Republican houses in 6 weeks to get a budget deal to do everything he wants, why would he not exercise that route, but instead use an illegal route as an executive to slash funding contrary to clear statute? It's because he doesn't think that elected Republican members of the House of Representatives and the Senate will go along with his radical plans. He doesn't think he can convince my GOP colleagues to take the axe to all these programs and hurt the American people in the way he wants to. Let's make President Trump do this the right way, not the wrong way. Let's put it on the shoulders of President Trump and the 2 Republican majorities. You want to slash all this stuff? Fine. Have that debate on the floor of the Senate, on the floor of the House. When we're doing the budget negotiation between now and March 14, show the American public your homework. Show them who's going to get hurt. Show them that we're going to hurt everyday people at the expense of the big guys that are getting the tax cut in the reconciliation bill later. Let's really have that debate right here in the full view of the American public with these spotlights on and the TV broadcasting it. That's what this president is afraid of, and that's why he's using this illegal strategy to accomplish what he is afraid he can't accomplish in the Article I branch. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Vermont.
Thank you, and I thank my colleagues. You know, President Trump likes to think that chaos is a useful tool. He can create disarray and disruption, and things will end up all right. There's another word that more aptly describes what he did. Cruel. Deeply cruel. You know, on Sunday night in Vermont, it's really a special night. You've got the work of the week behind you. The errands of the weekend are done. If you're fortunate and have a family, have a dinner, you're watching the football game, you're gathering yourself for the week ahead. The week ahead for people is different. It's a mom who has a dentist appointment that she finally got after 8 months on Medicaid. It's a dump truck driver who's looking forward to getting back and seeing his friends at work and getting that construction project in town completed. It's a Medicaid doctor who, as tired as he was from the week before, is excited about the week he faces, or she faces. It's the Meals on Wheels recipients, folks who've had a quiet weekend, who are lonely and are anticipating the delivery of that meal, not only for physical nourishment, but for the emotional comfort that comes with having that contact with the person delivering that meal. These are the everyday things that people do. They live in their life where they do work, they make appointments for their kids, they see them to child care, they help their neighbors. Out of the blue, with no discussion, an announcement goes out. It's illegal. It's sent out by a person who hasn't even been empowered to act. And it says to that mom who is going to the Medicaid appointment, it's off. It says to that person who was going to get a Meals on Wheels delivery, it's not coming. It says to that construction worker, that project you're so proud of and you're working on and you're making your contribution to your community, don't show up for work. It comes out of nowhere with no explanation, with no discussion. It's cruel, taking away the expectations that people depend on to live the hard lives that a lot of people have. And by the way, I talked about people who have a fair amount of stability in their life. There's women who are getting beaten, and they have refuge because they can call a hotline and they can go to a shelter closed. It's some kids who are homeless and have a shelter that they can go to because of the incredible effort of people in our communities, in your community and in mine, who care about that when it's invisible to so many others. So the jeopardy of those people taking away their security in the name of showing how chaos works to accomplish your goals, that's cruel. That is cruel. You know, it's also cruel because the folks who volunteer at some of these places, you're depriving them of the opportunity that makes so much of a difference in their life when they see their life being fulfilled by being able to help others. I got a ride from an Uber driver, and I was talking to him. He told me he was retired. And he's retired like a lot of people where they have a job or two. And his was driving. But the other thing he did was he delivered Meals on Wheels. And he told me about his mother-in-law, who until she was 91 delivered Meals on Wheels, oftentimes to people 30 years younger. And the joy he had in doing that is what made life so vivid and worthwhile for him to live. It's the joy of helping your neighbors. The president's order took that away from him. No meals to deliver. That's cruel. It's also totally illegal, totally unconstitutional. And this is the test that we face. If we're United States senators, and we believe that the Constitution is important not in the abstract, but in the role it has played in preserving and protecting the freedom of all Americans, and we believe that freedom is preserved when there's a check and balance against unbridled power, then we are the ones that have to act in order to protect the well-being of this country against illegal actions by a president who just doesn't care whether it's legal or it isn't. He worships power, and he's creating a new culture where if you worship community service, if you worship generosity, forgiveness, empathy, you're a sucker. That's the emotional message from this President Trump. Our people in Vermont, our people in Utah, they want and they do better. When they see injustice, they see suffering, they respond to it. They don't intensify it. So we have a decision as United States senators to stand up for what this institution requires, and that is that we are a separate and co-equal branch of government. And when the responsibilities are being subverted by an overreach by the executive, we resist. And we resist because it's absolutely vital to the well-being of this country that our democracy prevail, 3 branches of government, checks and balances. But it's really fundamentally important to the well-being of the people we represent, that their opportunity to live with stability, the ability to help their neighbors, to have confidence that promises made are promises kept, that we defend the good work, the goodwill, the integrity of the people of Vermont, the people of Utah, and of all of our 50 states. I yield back.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, as much as President Trump desires it, the president is not a king. We are here tonight because as much as President Trump desires it, the law is not a suggestion. And we are here tonight because President Trump, deciding he is a king and the law is a suggestion, has decided to betray American families. You've heard of the Great Depression, but right now, we're living through the Great Betrayal. The story of a man who ran for the presidency saying he was going to be a champion for families. And then, shortly after taking office, just 8 days ago, he proceeds to launch an attack on the very core programs that families, parents, children, communities depend on. Wow! Have you ever seen anything like it? Ever seen like it in your life? That someone campaigns for families, and just after they're sworn into office, they launch a huge attack on America's families. And that attack is actually illegal, because the law, once programs are funded, it is the executive's responsibility to implement those programs. Not to say, well, I'll implement this one, but not that one, or I'll shut down all the funding for all the programs. No. In fact, we've had that conversation in the past. Let's turn the clock back to President Nixon. President Nixon said, you all reached a compromise, and you had some programs some of you liked and some programs others liked, and you agreed to fund those programs, but you know what? I'm only going to fund the ones I like. I'm only going to distribute the funds for those programs which fit my agenda. And the courts responded and said, no, you can't do that. The power of the purse sits with Congress. It is Congress that decides what is going to be spent on what, and it's executive, the president's responsibility to implement that. And then Congress said, you know what? We'll give the president a break. If the president wants to roll back a program that's already been authorized and funded, he can ask Congress to do it. It's in the 1974 Budget Control and Impoundment Act, and it's called a rescission. The president sends a message up to us and says, hey, you know what? I don't think we need all the funds for developing that new nuclear warhead because it turns out it won't fit on a missile. I'd like to have those funds rescinded, put back in the Treasury. And we have 45 days to act. It's a privileged motion. All right, so along comes the great betrayal president, President Trump, who campaigned on families and then decided to attack the programs for families just 1 week into the office. And he says, I don't like that rescission structure. I'm just going to do what Nixon did. I'm going to do what the court said couldn't be done because I don't like what the Supreme Court decided previously. I'm just going to break the law. Now, is this like out of character for President Trump? Well, certainly just hours after being sworn into office and taking the oath to the Constitution of the United States of America, he said the 14th Amendment, the one about, birthright citizenship, I'm canceling it. Wow. Now we have two major instances of breaking the Constitution with just 8 days into the office. That's quite the record. And the thing is, real victims across this country. My colleagues have laid it out so well. The fact that that grant to run the women's shelter is locked up. That program to run Child Care Center is canceled. The grant to keep us at the forefront of semiconductor R&D in Corvallis, Oregon is on hold. That medical research is frozen. That contract for vaccination programs so we don't end up with an epidemic that will hurt children can't be written. That employment program for veterans returning from a theater of war ain't happening. No, that's crazy. And all these things affecting our families, and not just our families, our infrastructure. We worked so hard in a bipartisan way to launch the biggest infrastructure program since Eisenhower. Well, he did the massive national interstate highway system. But you know, it's a long time ago. So we said, we have to rebuild our bridges. We have to improve our mass transit. And we had a very large expenditure trying to bring these up to speed. Well, you know, in my state, there is a bridge on the interstate between Oregon and Washington. It's still a drawbridge. It's like the last drawbridge in the United States of America. It has to be replaced. But now it's on hold. We have another bridge that is under contract or grants to be able to be earthquake resistant because it will play a critical role when the big one, the one we always talk about, like California might fall into the sea, when that earthquake that happens roughly every 300 years off the coast of the United States on the west coast, like we need to have a bridge that actually holds up to it. Well, who knows if that's going to get built now. So not only does this attack families, not only does this obstruct and delay infrastructure projects, but it drives up costs. You know, I seem to have an echo in my ear about the president saying he wants to reduce costs. But instead, when you slow down projects, the cost of materials goes up. What is that? That's called driving up costs. So we're here tonight to say this cannot happen. We're here tonight to say to our Republican colleagues, this is not about red and blue or Republican and Democratic states. I talked to a colleague earlier today who said, I'm getting all kinds of calls from my home. And I bet that's true for every one of our 100 senators. I know everybody on this side of the aisle has been hearing from folks back home saying, we're pretty upset, we're pretty worried, what is happening? You know, that portal where we get funding for Medicaid, or that portal where we get funding for veterans benefits, or whatever it is, it's all shut down. I'm sure all 100 senators have been getting these calls. This is an attack by an authoritarian in the executive branch on the constitutional powers of Congress. You know, when we talk about the branches of government, we talk about Article 1 and Article 2 and Article 3. Article 1 of the Constitution is about Congress, because at the heart of democracy are folks who are elected down the hall in the House of Representatives, here in the Senate, to wrestle with and shape the law. Article 2 is the executive who executes those laws. Article 3 are the judges who defend the Constitution. Well, so here we are. Article 2, President, with authoritarian impulses, is attacking all of us here, all 100 senators, all 435 or so members of the House of Representatives, and saying, I want to take the power and decide how things get distributed for things that have already been enacted. Well, so that's why we're here. And I must say, it's even worse. It's even worse than simply this attack on families and this violation of the Constitution. It's part of a vast authoritarian power grab. In just the past few days, the inspector generals for agency after agency have been fired. The inspector generals are the ones who make sure the executive branch is according to the law, behaving according to the law. And they do all kinds of reports that hold people accountable. They do things about this program is working, that program is not working, this is being done in accordance with the law, this isn't. If the inspector generals are not there, there's no one to hold people accountable. That's the point of firing them all. That should put terror in everyone about the lawlessness President Trump intends to go forward with. I know there's all kinds of other things, all kinds of other attacks. For example, all of those lawyers in the Department of Justice who are assigned to environmental crimes, like when companies put huge amounts of asbestos and dump it in the wrong place, or huge amounts of chemicals that contaminate some groundwater and cause all kinds of citizens to have wells that they can't use anymore, or so on and so forth. Every one of them has been tossed. They got the word. They're not there anymore, just within a few days of the start of this administration. So I thank my colleagues who came here tonight to talk about this. The architect of this plan is a man named Russell Vought. Russell Vought did the last budget for Trump in his first time he served. And then he started a nonprofit think tank that worked to develop the basic plans for Project 2025. And then he became the architect of Project 2025, and it has three main parts. The first part, attack and tear down programs for America's families, the ones that help them get on their feet and be able to thrive and move into the middle class. The second part is to borrow $2 to $3 trillion from the federal treasury. And the third part is to do massive tax giveaways to the richest Americans. He's laid all three of them. Check it out, Project 2025. He came and talked to us all about all these programs, these three steps. Savage, the programs for families. Of course, that wasn't exactly the words he used. He just said massive cuts to things like Medicaid, massive cuts to things like child care programs. Everybody should be on their own with no foundation to have any assistance getting on their feet and being able to move forward. Not on health care, not on housing, not on education, not on child care, not on anything. Well, that's the attack on families. That's the great betrayal. Now, he's going to be voted on this Thursday in the Budget Committee. And the Budget Democrats and our Democratic leader have written and said this vote should be delayed. We are in the middle of a constitutional crisis. The architect of that crisis is the man to be voted on Thursday. This is wrong. Let's fix this constitutional crisis and then continue with the conversation about confirmation of the nominee, Russell Vought. Mr. President, let's work together, Democrats and Republicans, to defend the institutions of our democracy. Let's say no to this sweeping authoritarian power grab. Let's defend the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. President.